Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fundamental question about us, about humans.
Right.
What was it that fueled the evolution of our pretty amazing ability to cooperate, to form these complex societies? It's the kind of stuff that really sets us apart.
It absolutely is.
We've got some, I think, really interesting insights to explore today. They come from a research article. It's called Environmental Variability Promotes the Evolution of Cooperation Among Humans. Simulation suggests.
And it was published in PLOS Complex Systems, a peer-reviewed journal.
Exactly. So our mission today, let's keep it straightforward. We want to dig into how these constantly changing environments of our deep past might have actually pushed our ancestors towards working together.
That's the core question. You see, Middle Stone Age in Africa, it's pretty widely accepted as this key period for when modern human behaviors really started to emerge.
Like abstract thought, symbols.
Yes, symbolic communication, planning ahead, and crucially for what we're talking about, this advanced sociality. Now, we generally agree on the when and where of these developments, roughly speaking.
But the how is still up for debate.
Precisely. The exact mechanisms, the triggers for this big evolutionary jump, well, that's still something researchers are actively investigating.
Okay, so we're zooming in on the MSA. We see more complex tools appearing, maybe some early art or symbols. But what was the spark? What really ignited the social side of things? Is there a leading theory?
There is. One really influential idea is the variability selection hypothesis, the VSH.
BSA, yeah.
It was proposed by Rick Potts, and the basic idea is that Africa during the MSA saw huge environmental instability, massive swings in climate, landscapes changing, resources appearing and disappearing.
Wow, okay, so unpredictable.
Highly unpredictable, and the VSH suggests this favored individuals who were really adaptable, flexible thinkers who could cope when things suddenly changed.
Right, so traditionally, VSH has been about individual brains getting smarter, more flexible, being able to figure things out on your own when the environment throws you a curveball.
Exactly. That's been the main focus.
But the research we're looking at today adds a twist, doesn't it? It suggests maybe these same environmental pressures also pushed us towards, well, getting along better, towards cooperation.
Precisely. This work expands the VSH framework. It asks, could this environmental variability have also shaped our social evolution? Specifically, could it have driven cooperation between different groups?
How do they test that? You can't exactly run experiments on the MSA.
No, you can't. So these researchers, they're at the University of Tsukuba, they used multi-agent simulation models. Think of it like creating little digital societies.
Okay, like a computer game, almost.
Sort of, but based on evolutionary game theory. They set up these agents, these digital groups, gave them basic rules about interacting and resources, and then subjected them to different kinds of environmental change to see how cooperation evolved, or didn't.
Fascinating. So, virtual worlds to test evolutionary ideas. What kinds of environmental changes did they simulate? What were the scenarios?
They mainly focused on two key types of variability. The first one they called regional variability, or RV.
RV, regional. Okay.
Yeah, so picture a landscape where there are resource-rich areas, but where those areas are shifts over time, they move around geographically.
So the good spots aren't always in the same place.
Exactly. But the total amount of resources across the whole map stays pretty much the same. The key thing here is, if your local area suddenly becomes resource poor, somewhere else might be booming.
Right. So that immediately creates a potential reason to connect with others, doesn't it? If we're struggling here, but we know things are good over there, maybe we can work something out, exchange, help each other.
That's the idea. It sets up this potential for interdependence driven by those regional shifts. It creates opportunities for mutual benefit.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. What was the other main type of variability?
The second was universal variability, or UV.
Universal. So everywhere at once.
Pretty much. In the UV scenario, the overall resource levels fluctuate across all regions at the same time, so either everyone's doing well or everyone's struggling together.
But the best locations stay the best locations.
Yes. The locations of the resource-rich areas don't change in the UV model, just the total amount available everywhere fluctuates. They also tested a combined variability model, CV, which basically mixed RV and UV together.
Gotcha. And just to be clear, these models were looking at cooperation between different groups separated geographically, not just cooperation within one little band of people.
Yes, that's a really important distinction. They were specifically interested in how these environmental changes affected cooperation between distinct, often distant groups.
Okay, this setup makes sense. So the big question, what happened in the simulations? What did they find out about how RV and UV influenced cooperation?
Well, the results were pretty striking. They found that regional variability, the RV
The
scenario,
one where the good spots move around?
yes, that one strongly promoted the evolution of cooperation. The simulations really showed that when resources shifted geographically, it created those exact opportunities we talked about.
The need for exchange.
Exactly. Groups in temporarily poor areas had a strong incentive to cooperate with groups in richer areas. This sort of reciprocal need, fundamentally driven by the shifting environment, seemed to be a powerful force pushing cooperative behaviors to emerge and stick around.
That clicks. You know, if you know your own patch might become barren later, maybe you're more willing to help someone else now, hoping they'll return the favor when the tables turn. It's like insurance.
In a way, yes, it builds resilience through connection.
So what about the other one? Universal variability, where everyone booms or busts together.
That one was really interesting because it had a much weaker effect. UV didn't seem to push the evolution of cooperation nearly as much as RB did.
Why not? What was their thinking there?
Their interpretation is that if everyone's in the same boat, resource-wise,
Rich or poor together.
then the specific advantage of intergroup cooperation, of exchanging resources between regions, isn't really heightened. The opportunities for that crucial mutual benefit driven by differences in regional conditions just aren't there in the same way.
So it's not just change itself, but the pattern of change that matters. Specifically, change that creates these imbalances and, therefore, opportunities for mutually beneficial exchange between groups.
That seems to be the key takeaway from comparing RV and UV.
Now, you mentioned this is tied into social networks, too. It wasn't just about deciding whether to cooperate, but also who to cooperate with.
Exactly. That was another major finding. The evolution of cooperation wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It was deeply interwoven with how the social networks themselves evolved, who was connected to whom.
How did that work in the model?
Well, when a group's resources dipped in the simulation, they didn't just sit there. They often adjusted their strategies, but they also adjusted their connections. They tended to try and form links with groups that currently had more resources.
Ah, okay. So if times are tough, you look around and try to buddy up with the groups that seem to be doing better. Makes sense from a survival perspective?
It does, and they built in this specific mechanism related to resource thresholds.
Thresholds, like a tipping point.
Sort of. When a group's resources fell below a certain critical level, it triggered what they called a reformation process.
Reformation. What did that involve?
Two things happened. First, the struggling group would look around and imitate the strategies of more successful groups, like whatever they're doing, it's working, let's try that.
Learning from success.
Right. And second, they would actively restructure their network connections. They'd preferentially try to link up with those more resource-rich neighbors, cut ties with less successful ones, perhaps.
So it's both imitating behavior and strategically choosing your partners based on their current success.
Exactly. And that combination, imitating strategies and reforming networks based on resources, was identified as a really key driver for getting cooperation going and spreading through the simulated population, especially under RV conditions.
And this whole process, driven by the environment changing and groups reforming networks, it wasn't necessarily a smooth ride towards more cooperation, was it? Did the levels fluctuate?
They did. That's another interesting point. They found that environmental variability, especially RV, actually increased the fluctuations in cooperation rates over time. It wasn't a straight line upwards.
More like ups and downs.
Yeah, periods where cooperation might increase, then maybe dip again, but these fluctuations were important. Combined with the small element of random mutation, just new strategies popping up by chance in the model, these unstable periods actually allowed new cooperative strategies to get introduced.
So the chaos, in a way, created openings.
It seems so. The environmental shifts kept the system dynamic, preventing it from just settling into one non-cooperative state. It allowed these new cooperative approaches to emerge and be tested by the prevailing conditions.
And if a new cooperative strategy happened to give a group a resource advantage?
Then you potentially get a positive feedback loop kicking in.
How so?
Well, more cooperation could lead to better resource access or security for those cooperating groups, and that makes them
Right.
more successful, right?
More resources.
Which, according to the model's rules, makes them more attractive partners for other groups during that reformation phase.
Ah, so success breeds connections.
Exactly. So successful cooperators attract more connections, strengthening their network position, which might further reinforce cooperative norms and strategies within that network. It becomes self-perpetuating to a degree.
Wow. It's quite a complex picture they're painting, linking environment, behavior, and social structure together. It feels really powerful to think that these ancient environmental pressures could have left such a deep imprint on our social nature.
It's a compelling argument, and the
Yes.
researchers do briefly connect it to today.
Oh, how so? Thinking about modern environmental change.
Yeah, they suggest these findings might offer some insights into how environmental shifts, or maybe other large-scale crises we face today, could influence cooperation within and between societies now.
Hmm. Thinking about resource distribution, shared challenges.
Exactly. Those dynamics of who has what and the need for mutual support or exchange when things get tough, they don't necessarily go away.
Of course, it's a simulation. It's not the real MSA. The researchers must have pointed out some limitations, right? Things the model doesn't capture yet.
Oh, absolutely. They're very clear it's a simplification. For instance, the current model doesn't really include group mobility.
Meaning groups couldn't just pack up and move to a better area.
Right. In reality, that was likely an option sometimes. They also want to incorporate memory, the idea that past interactions matter. You're probably more likely to cooperate with someone who helped you before.
Trust, reputation.
Exactly. And finally, they want to explore more random factors in network changes, not just purely resource-driven ones. Real social networks have some randomness too.
Okay, lots of avenues for future research then. But if we boil down what we've discussed today, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the core message is that regional environmental variability, that specific pattern where resources shift around geographically, seems like it could have been a really significant catalyst for the evolution of human cooperation.
More so than just general hardship.
It appears so, based on these simulations. This kind of shifting unpredictability seems uniquely suited to creating the conditions where helping each other, exchanging resources between groups, provided a major survival advantage during the Middle Stone Age in Africa. It might have laid down some of the crucial groundwork for our complex social lives today.
So paradoxically, an unstable, unpredictable world might have been exactly what pushed us to become more reliant on each other, more cooperative. That's kind of an aha moment, isn't it? Turning a challenge into a strength.
It really is. It highlights how sometimes the toughest pressures are what drive the most profound evolutionary innovations, not just in tools or brains, but in how we relate to each other.
And maybe that leaves us with something to think about as we finish up. What kinds of variability are shaping us now? Economic ups and downs, social changes, technological disruption.
Hmm.
How might those be influencing cooperation and the way our own social networks are structured today?
That's a fascinating question. Definitely something to ponder how these deep historical patterns might still echo in our modern world.
Indeed. Well, thanks for digging into this with me.
My pleasure.